What is paganism? What is Wicca? Their belief systems, traditions, and rituals. Seen here, a ritual honoring the Sabbath or holy day of Beltane, marking the longest day of the year. Who are some of paganism and Wicca's contemporary adherents, and what draws them to these spiritual paths? Welcome to Exploring Paganism. In this edition, you'll meet people who are part of the Willow Dragonstone Pagan Community, a progressive pagan community based in suburban Atlanta. But first, when you search for the definition of the word pagan, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary offers this. Pagan is derived from the late Latin paganus, which was used at the end of the Roman Empire to name those who practiced a religion other than Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. Early Christians often used the term to refer to non-Christians who worshipped multiple deities. In Latin, paganus originally meant country dweller or civilian. The dictionary's definition and etymology of heathen overlap with those of pagan. Both words denote an unconverted member of a people or nation that does not acknowledge the God of the Bible. Both words have developed broader and pejorative meanings, with pagan being used to mean an irreligious or hedonistic person, and heathen, uncivilized or strange. Look up Wiccan and you find it defined by Merriam-Webster as a religion influenced by pre-Christian beliefs and practices of Western Europe that affirms the existence of supernatural powers such as magic, and of both male and female deities who inhere in nature, and that emphasizes ritual observance of seasonal and life cycles. Yet despite what the dictionary says, how is paganism and Wicca defined and lived in a 21st century context? We begin with stories of personal journeys into the pagan spiritual path with members of the Willow Dragonstone Community Coven. Reverend Lydia M.N. Crabtree is Coven president, a high priestess, author, and pagan rights advocate.
I was raised Southern Baptist, church 4 to 5 times a week. And I think like most pagans you run into, they will say that it did not feel comfortable. And I also spent a lot of time on a farm in South Georgia with my grandparents. And they were closer to the earth, doing all the plowing and the planting of corn. And so they had a different view of life. We still went to church, but my grandmother is what we would call magical, just that wise woman in the village that people would go to and ask questions, and she would talk to them, and she would know things she shouldn't have known. And I mean, I've never seen anyone who had a green thumb like she did. It was amazing. And so when I spent time with her, she would tell me that some of us had gifts, and the church wasn't necessarily down with that, and so maybe we didn't tell anybody. And so I spent a lot of time with her, learning from her. She had rules for the gifts of our family. And I grew up, I went to college, I met my first husband, we got married, and we joined a church. And this particular congregation was extremely evangelical Christian. And so I went through this phase of trying to really fit into that mold of what the Baptist and evangelicals believe is a good woman and a good wife. And so one day, I went to Sunday school and we were talking about Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31 is the no greater woman you will find passage in the Bible. And so they were talking about how this passage says that she stays at home and she doesn't, she's very submissive to her husband, and how it really tells us that women shouldn't work outside the home and they should just have children. And they were using it as a reason to homeschool. And I laughed, because if you read that passage, it actually says that she runs a vineyard and she oversees the fields, and she oversees the local cloth making group, and she clothes all of her people. Oh, and she had a ton of servants, so she was wealthy. And I introduced this idea, and what eventually happened was they sent an elder woman to me to tell me that I wasn't saved because I didn't properly agree with their interpretation of that particular passage. And it was really, that was the beginning of my pagan journey, because I knew in that moment, all of the things I had learned in childhood was no man knows the mind of God, and no man can tell me what my relationship with God is. And the only person who really can tell me what to believe is the God that I believe in. And all of that kind of leads you to part ways with a church that says, this guy is in charge, the Pope, the pastor, whoever the person may be, and what they say is the Word of God. And so once you begin to kind of think about the Word of God for yourself, you kind of part ways with the church. It's inevitable. I ended up getting excommunicated from that particular church because shortly thereafter I decided to get a divorce and change my life, and I shook everything up. And so, but I was very conflicted, very conflicted. I would pray to God. I would say, I don't want to go to hell. I'm really worried about this. And so I lived in Chattanooga at the time, and I'm driving up Lookout Mountain, which is a very windy, curvy road. And I'm driving up the mountain, and I'm going, God, please, I need you to tell me, because I'm going to a witch's house, the first witch I'd ever met. And I said, you need to tell me now if this is wrong or right. You need to tell me now if something isn't, if I'm going down the road to hell and back, I need to know now. And I don't need some little tiny sign. Like, I need the world to split apart. I need it to be like mega, like no doubt that God has spoken to me. And in this particular mountain, golden eagles will fly around. And I came around the curve and I see them flying on the air currents. And the one I lock eyes on turns like 180 and starts coming straight toward me. And then it flips around so that it's in my lane in the car. And it's huge. Its wingspan's wider than my vehicle. Its talons are out. It's screeching. I slam on my brakes. And there's this whole, like, here's this, bird in my face screeching. And then it flies over my car and is gone. And I actually, for a minute, thought that wasn't real. Like, I must have imagined that. Until I turn to my left, and there's another car who has stopped, and his jaw is on his door. And I point out the window like, did that really happen? And the guy was like, oh, that really just happened. So I went on to the witch's house, and we do what witches do. We looked it up. And I have a verbal lineage of Cherokee. And my grandmother had talked about that quite a bit and had shown me the books that prove that we were Cherokee. And Shadagaya is the golden eagle messenger for the Cherokee. And his messages from the gods are always that you're on a quest, and this is the beginning of your quest. And so the minute I understood that, I was like, well, okay, I'm pagan, and that's the end of that.
Members of the community take on a magical name, a name used for ritual purposes. Nathaniel Pucket has embraced the Gaelic name Shinnick Jar, Oaken Fox.
I grew up in a very strict Southern Baptist home. The church that we went to was literally about a mile down the road from our house. Small, one room, a couple of windows and a pulpit, and that was about it. No central heating or air. In the winter, we ran off of a kerosene space heater. Even from a young age, I was never comfortable there. And as I got older, it turned, honestly, more and more into animosity. A lot of that had to do with I grew up in a very small town that had very specific views about race and commingling and relationships between such. So a lot of the older people, which was the majority of the church, had problems with who I was racially, or who I am. My kind of escape for that was the woods. And every Sunday, whenever church was over, that was my getaway. And that's, where I went to kind of decompress and deal with everything that I had just dealt with. And it wasn't until years later that our town finally got an actual public library. And there was one book in the entire library on paganism and Wicca, and I happened to find it. And was terrified to bring it home, so I would go to the library whenever I could and kind of hide back in the corner and read it, and just everything in it for me at that time just resonated. And
Like what?
well, it was very, very kind of beginner level, and some of the information looking back now wasn't great information, but the kind of overbroad of the spirituality of nature and the connection between people and nature, and how we work with it, and some of the kind of basic sort of rituals of communion with nature and stuff like that was stuff that I realized were things that I was already doing and had been doing for years on my own. And that was my kind of, wow, this is it moment. Like that, this actually really makes sense. And from there started going online and just devouring whatever information I could find, and the more I found, just the more and more it made sense. And it was kind of, once I found it, I never really looked back. That was it.
Sarah Neal is CEO of Willow Dragonstone, as well as one of the community high priestesses, one who, like others who have trained for leadership roles, leads ritual and guides others as they explore their spiritual path.
My mom is a Methodist minister, but we grew up with her talking to us about God the parent instead of God the father. So that always was an idea for us. And we lived in Grant Park at the time, so we'd have to drive through little 5 Points, and there was a house that was known to be the witch's house. So every time we drive through there, it's like, Mommy, can we pass by the witch's house? So it was always very open. And as I got into high school and started to be around other pagans, it really started to formulate in my head, oh, wait, this is real. This is not this scary devil worshiping stuff that's going on. Like, this is a real path. And the idea of Goddess the Mother was very inspiring for me. And my parents always took on, they thought it was going to be a phase for a while, 20 years later. And they tolerated it. And they always thought, as long as you have something. And then as things have progressed, and I have progressed on my path, they've just kind of, okay. And we're at, even my grandmother, who is 100 years old, is aware of my spiritual path. And her thoughts have always been, as long as you have something. And so she's been to different things with me and has been very embracing of that. So I've been very lucky. I've had a great support system from my family all along. So it's been very nice. As I grew up with a mom who was very 70s, ERA and let's go, women, hear me roar. And so that was great. And I went to an all-women's college and yay, woman and women power. And then I started to realize that it's nice to have a balance. And so the idea of male and female working in harmony and playing off of each other's strengths and being strong where the other's weak, and both of them being able to do that has really just been very powerful for me, not only in my spiritual life, but in my mundane life as well. So to realize that it's okay to want to be with a man, it's okay for a man to come to my rescue every once in a while, because I'll be damned if I don't go rescue him every once in a while too. So it's a nice balance to have, and that's been very powerful. That I can stand by my husband's side, and sometimes I can stand in front of him, and sometimes I can stand in back of him, and that's okay. So that's been a big, powerful role over the last several years for me.
Some community members remain in what's referred to as the broom closet for fear of discrimination or worse. We'll call this woman Selket Brigid, who chose not to show her face.
Because I was raised Christian Science. So I guess it was the poetry and the beauty of the words and the song and the music. And it appeals to my inner soul. Even as a child, I believed in fairies and things like that. And so Wicca to me was when I finally realized that as a woman, I do have power. And my power is within me, which is one thing that I don't think, I'm not a feminist, I'm a humanist. I want equal rights for everyone. But it's just the beauty of the religion and what it means to me and the spirituality, and it's nature, it's everything. My favorite writer, Diane Ackerman, she says I'm an earth ecstatic, and I would have to call myself that as well.
The personal journeys that led people to the pagan path reflect a common theme, a search for meaning and community. Katie Thackrey was curious, read, and sought out like-minded people.
So I was raised Baptist in what they would consider to be like an independent, fundamental, Bible-believing Baptist church. That's how they purport. And so I had a strong upbringing in spirituality and, learned some basic tenets about faith and how that works and kind of what deity looks like. And I just could not agree with, some of the things that they were teaching. Like there was a lot of cognitive dissonance between an all-loving, all-knowing God that still allows his creation to burn eternally. Like I could not reconcile that. Along with some of the other things that they would teach. So I left the church around 17 or 18 and just kind of was like, okay, I'm gonna do my own thing. And I don't know, like I would still read my Bible and kind of take the principles that I identified with. And I started school. I started at Clayton State University doing a voice performance major, and was just kind of talking to one of the girls that I ate lunch with every day and was kind of sharing with her what I thought about divinity. And she was like, oh, well, your beliefs sound very Wiccan. And I was like, what is that? And she was like, well, it's in this book series that I'm reading. Maybe you should check it out and kind of read up on it. So I went and got a book. I went to, I guess it was Books A Million back then, and got a book called Wicca for Beginners and read through it, and I was like, oh, well, this is very interesting, and I do identify with a lot of things. And I was terrified reading through it for the first time because in the church, they teach that anything that's not like their God is demonic. And I was just like terrified that I was going to open some portal to hell or something inadvertently and not know it. And but yeah, I like reading that book. I kind of I could identify with a lot of what was said and kind of the open-mindedness of the author and how she presented the work. And I just started reading more and kept on. I guess about 3 years ago, I went to Pagan Pride Atlanta, and I kind of had been reading a few books on Wicca, gosh, probably 7-8 years before that, but I hadn't really like found anyone to teach me, and I'm not the best at learning without guidance of some sort. So I was like, well, I'll just go check out Pagan Pride and we'll see, what that's about. And I started collecting information from the different booths that were there, and one of those happened to be Willow Dragonstone Community. And I think when I showed up to Dia and Tony's house for the first Sabbath, it was very much a feeling of coming home. And I think when you find your spiritual path, whether that's Christianity or whether that's, Judaism or Buddhism or whatever that is, there is the sense of belonging and that sense of kind of arrival. Like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been looking for, this kind of like-minded, thought patterns and belief structure. And so that's what it is. It's like, it definitely provides that sense of belonging that a lot of people experience with a conventional church, but we just don't meet at the same times they do, or for the same holidays or the same purposes that they do.
Tony Crabtree is a founder of the community and a priest during ritual.
So all my life, my family, I've never been really a Christian or church-going person, but all my life I've said that outdoors was my church. My church was outside because my family never really went to church. Well, I met this lovely silver-haired woman. Her name is Dia, and she asked me to go camping about 2 months after we met. And she said, "Oh," I said, "I love camping. I'm really an outdoorsy kind of guy." But then she said, "Well, it's a gathering." And I said, "What's a gathering?" She said, "Well, it's a group of people that get together and they," and I already knew she was in the craft and Wiccan. So it's a gathering of Wiccans and Pagans and all kinds of different people I've never met. And we went and camped out, and there was about 150 people, 200 people. And at that particular event, it was a Beltane, and I saw Dia's best friend get hand-fasted. You've already interviewed her, Sarah. She got hand-fasted that weekend, and I met a bunch of people who were just like me, and I think I finally, by the end of the weekend, to make a long story short, I decided that I had found where I belong. It was really moving for me.
For Jax Gilbert, who like others performs the role of priestess leading ritual, finding her way to the pagan path was a healing journey.
Well, it actually started, I would say, right after my mother passed. I went through a bit of depression, and my mother and father are atheists, so we did not grow up with religion. And although I felt very spiritual, I was not directed in any particular direction, but I always felt more comfortable and more closer to God out in nature. So when I was looking for my own personal guidance after my mother died, I went to a metaphysical store, and the lady gave me the card for Dia, and one of the young girls that was part of the group at the time, but she's no longer with us. But yeah, they brought me into the group. I was actually part of one of the founding members before I even called myself Pagan. But yeah, I mean, I felt right at home immediately. I mean, these people were just so welcoming, and their beliefs were just so close to my own. It just felt right. So, I mean, it wasn't long before I was, part of the inner circle. To me, I think if you look towards nature, you're going to understand what God wants from each of us. Like a lot of religions will teach you about sin and what you should and should be doing. If it doesn't exist in nature, then I don't think it comes from God. I think that's man's beliefs. So yeah, that's my own personal belief, is that if I'm going to find guidance, I'm going to find it by what I find in the natural world. It makes me feel like she's still here with me, that she hasn't really passed on, that she's left a bit of herself inside of me, and it definitely made me feel better. I accept her death a lot more easily.
Dick Sells has studied paganism and counsels pagans.
And at, I guess, 17 years of age, I was the youngest licensed local preacher in the Methodist Church. And by the time I was graduated from high school, I had my first car and drove 300 miles, the furthest trip I'd ever made like that, and became the pastor of 3 churches, and was preaching at 17 years of age, and started full-time college. So I started out as a Methodist, and as things progressed, I found that there were things I did not agree with. I felt it was all right for people if they felt that way, but I did not. I'm not a heavy drinker. You know, I couldn't keep the lights on in the liquor store with my yearly purchases. I couldn't keep the lights on for one night. But I found that I believed in moderation, and I did not believe in total abstinence. And yet the bishop once a year proclaimed that we must preach on total abstinence. So I was invited to go to an Episcopal church, and I did so, and I found that was more to my liking. They were more liberal, and I found it was very relaxing, and I liked the smells and bells and the incense, all of the ritual. And so I went back to school and to become an Episcopal priest, and I found that you know, that was good. I enjoyed that. I was very relaxed, but there was still something lacking. And my wife, she had a doctorate and had a master's in social work and worked in a mental hospital. And she was telling me about all this medicinal herbs and things she was reading about, and about all this spiritual healing. And I laughed at it and poo-pooed it as, you know, crazy sort of thing. But my mind has always been to seek out verification for my beliefs. So I began to read and study all these books on medicinal herbs and the people who use them and their thought processes, and became acquainted with Dr. and Mrs. Ryan over in North Carolina, and began to do some of their tests. And eventually I found that the things I was laughing at, I really believed and felt that way. So I began to read more and more on the craft, or the craft of the wise, or Wicca. And I found that this was something that not only appealed to me, but made my life the whole thing that I had wanted it to be.